I would like to read from the central sequence in this book, which is called Anfal. This is based on my postdoctoral research about the survivors of the genocide campaign in 1988. Anfal is the name of the 8th chapter of the Quran, and the Iraqi state, Saddam Hussein's state, picked that name up from the Quran and used it against a Muslim population. It means the spoils of war. During the campaign, 281 gas attacks were used, and over 100,000 people ended up in mass graves. More than 2,600 villages were razed to the ground. The sequence is written as dramatic monologues from the point of view of the different women. And I just wanted to capture the complexity of the Anfal story and how every person that got caught up in it had a different experience, and that adds a different dimension to the catastrophe. So this one is called Dibs Camp, the women's prison, and it's for Nabat Fayaq Rahman. This survivor lost her husband, who was shot at the mass graves, a teenage daughter, and a toddler son. You do not die, not when you want to, not when you see your strong husband, the big brother in his own family, kicked bloody by a group of men, equipped with loaded guns and hatred. Not when your beautiful teenage daughter is handpicked by soldiers, never comes back, and for the rest of your life you are left to wonder, was she sold to prostitution? Does she still live? Not when your son withers in your lap and he cries until he can no more, when the last thing he asks of you is cucumber, and you give him a green slipper to suckle on because he's beyond knowing the difference. No, not even when the rest of your children grow fed up with your black garments, your secret tears, your headaches when you smell cucumber. You do not die. Many of the gas survivors suffered from long-term and chronic ill health, and some of them died as a result of cancer, and the most common cancers were skin cancer, lung cancer, and womb cancer for women. According to research done by doctors in the region, the areas that were gassed, the rate of cancer is 5 times higher than the rest of the region. So this woman has womb cancer, the gas survivor. My body is blooming. Every night, leaking flowers, I turn my mattress into a bed of roses. Black, cherry red, pink and gold. By day, I hand wash the towels, recall the stillborn after the gassing. Who would have thought there were weapons that turn every part of your body against you, every bruise, cough or nosebleed seeming like the final betrayal? Weapons that turn you into a despised being in your own village, no one daring to visit you, thinking you are contagious. Weapons that kill you years after being exposed, leaving you unable to blame anyone for your death. One of the things that survivors spoke about and wanted was closure. And they all said that they cannot have closure unless they have a body that they could bury. So these mass graves have been identified throughout Iraq, the desert part of Iraq. Unfortunately, uncovering them is very expensive, and even those that were uncovered, they could not do DNA testing. So the victims have been buried in graves, in cemeteries without any name. This poem is called Dispute Over a Mass Grave, and it's about 2 women fighting over the remains of a 14-year-old boy. The one you have finished examining is my son. That is the milky-colored Kurdish suit his father tailored for him, the blue shirt his uncle gave to him. Your findings prove that it is him. He was a tall 14-year-old, was left-handed, had broken a rib. I know she too has been looking for her son. But you have to tell her that this is not him. Yes, the two of them were playmates and fought the year before. But it was my son who broke a rib. Hers only feigned to escape trouble. That one is mine. Please give him back to me. I will bury him on the verge of my garden. The mulberry tree will offer him its thick shadow. The flowers will earnestly guard his grave. The hens will peck on his gravestone. The beehive will hum above his head. When I started off my research, my fieldwork, I thought that everybody would want to talk about their story, and that was an assumption that was false. There were survivors who didn't want to talk because they had been interviewed by various people and they felt that they were used and they were abandoned to cater for themselves afterwards. So I tried to interview this woman, but she would not speak with me. This poem is called The Angry Survivor. I am fed up with documentations of my grief. Journalists asking me to sing a lullaby for my dead children to broadcast during commemorations. Government officials using my story as propaganda during elections. Women activists forcing me to talk about rape, only to prove that women are oppressed. Researchers claiming to document history, well, all they do is pick my wounds. This is my story, not yours. Long after you turn off your recorder, I stay indoors and weep. Why don't people understand? I am neither hero nor God. Cannot stand the talk of forgiveness. For years, I went to every wake, wept at every man's funeral, kept asking why, realized that I will never understand. Now I just endure the days by planting cucumbers which you interrupted, by believing in another world where there is justice, by watching my remaining children as they sleep. Spare me your despair and understanding. You can't resurrect the dead. Feed my hungry children. Bring me recognition and respect. Take history with you and go. Don't come here again. I just don't want to know. This is the final poem in the sequence, which is called Researcher's Blues. I guess when I started this research, I didn't realize how it would affect my life. I imagined I knew all about Anfal, being a Kurd, and I imagined I was ready for it. Then, of course, when you spend a few years listening to stories of people whose lives have been torn apart, whose dear ones have been killed, who've suffered from poverty and marginalization, who could not feed their children, who still live in shacks, it's going to affect you very much, and it's going to, for me, it changed my life. Every day, I try to lose them in the streets, leave them behind in a bend in the road and keep on walking. But they follow me everywhere, their voices combining into a hum from which sentences rise and fall. The woman I never interviewed cut the string of my sleep at dawn, whispering, "I am not well." Why didn't I listen to her story? Why didn't I realize that she was dying? The one widowed at 26 told me, "Imagine 20 years of loneliness." I remember her in the middle of an embrace and start weeping. The pleading voice of the woman who was raped echoes in my head. I only wanted bread for my children. I wish I had told her that she is good, she is pure, not spoiled as she thinks she is. Then I remember the old couple in their mud brick house surrounded by goats and chicken. I remember their tears when they talk about their children, when they remember a woman who had been rich and powerful in her own village, but in Nogra Salman she was stinking, abandoned, worm-stricken. What was the dead woman's name? Why didn't I try to find her family? I keep walking. All I want is to walk without crying, without being pitied by people who think that I have problems with love, without the homeless man telling me that he is sorry. I want to disappear, be unnoticed, unpitied. Some time ago, when it all began, it was all clear. I knew what had to be done. All I can do now is keep walking, carrying this sorrow in my soul. All I can do is pour with grief, which has no beginning and no end.